Hello everyone and welcome to the 1-800-RESPECT webinar series. Today's topic is Gender Equality and Violence Against Women, a Human Rights Approach. 1-800-RESPECT is pleased to welcome Liz Broderick, the Sex Discrimination Commissioner for Australian Human Rights Commission. Liz has overall responsibility for advancing gender equality in Australia. She has been a key advocate for Australia's first national paid parental leave scheme, increasing women's workforce participation and recognition of domestic violence as a workplace issue. She has promoted changes to the Australian Stock Exchange corporate governance regime, requiring all publicly listed companies to set targets for women at board and senior executive level. She has brought together Australia's senior male leaders from business, government and the military to form the Male Champions of Change group. Liz is currently leading the review into the treatment of women in the Australian Defence Force, member for the World Bank's Advisory Council on Gender and Development, member of the University of Technology Sydney Advisory Board and Supply Nation. This webinar is live and interactive. You are encouraged to participate by posing questions to the presenter. Please note that case-specific information cannot be answered during this webinar. All other questions can be typed into the chat box, which is located at the bottom left-hand side of your screen. Responses to your questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. We also encourage you to participate in the online discussion tool, which you will be redirected to after completing the survey. We will be closing this thread at 2:15 p.m, so jump on if you have any further questions that we may not have time for during the next 45 minutes. I'd now like to pass you over to Liz to begin.
Thanks very much, Michelle, and welcome to all the participants on the webinar, and also to thank you to 1800-RESPECT for inviting me to come onto the webinar. It's a great a series of events and webinars that 1-800-RESPECT do, and it's a great pleasure to be with you all. Even though I can't see you all, I'm sure you're on the other end of the line, so terrific to be here. I just want to start by acknowledging that we are meeting on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander land, wherever you are across Australia. I think one of the great joys about my role is I get to work with many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have for a long time advocated for equality, and of course thank them for their custodianship and really loving care of the land. So I'll start at that place. What I thought I'd do today was to really tell you a little bit about my role as a Sex Discrimination Commissioner, the Human Rights Commission, but also talk a little bit about the international conventions from which the obligations on the state, on the government, come in relation to preventing violence against women, and really frame it around a human rights discussion, and then talk a bit about the prevalence data and some of the strategies that we're pursuing. And I'd love to interact with you in the session that follows the webinar to see what your experiences are, and also, you know, any comments or questions that you might have. So just to start off, the Australian Human Rights Commission is Australia's national human rights institution. So we sit independently of government. We're not part of government, and we have to have independence according to what they call the Paris Principles. So these were principles that were developed after the Second World War, when the United Nations created national human rights institutions around the world, and is absolutely integral to our continuing as a human rights institution. So here at the Australian Human Rights Institution, we have 7 commissioners plus a president. So we have commissioners for special purpose like disability, like race, like age and children, and of course sex discrimination. My role as the Sex Discrimination Commissioner, and I'll just move on to our next slide here. Where to tick? Start the slideshow. So my role here is as the Sex Discrimination Commissioner. So the Act that I administer has as its objective the promotion of gender equality in all aspects of public life in Australian society. So it's focused on eradicating all forms of discrimination on the basis of sex. And I have to say, it's an amazing role. It's such a great privilege to be in the role, because one minute I can be 200 metres under the ocean in a submarine trying to stave off seasicknesses. I'm conducting some focus groups. I can be in the United Nations, the World Bank. Last week I was up in NATO. I can be in the Parliament. I can be camping out with Aboriginal women in women's refuges, working with refugee women. So different groups of not just women but also men, people who are interested and demanding equality here in Australia, and also those people whose human rights have been abused for whatever reason. And when I first came into the role, I thought the first thing that I should do was to get out as far and wide across this country and listen to the lived experiences of men and women in gender equality. So I undertook a listening tour where I spoke to thousands of people from very diverse backgrounds. And as a result of that, I developed some priority areas that I said, well, okay, over my 5-year term, these are the 5 areas that I'm going to concentrate on. And some of those are up on the screen in front of you, such as advocating for a paid parental leave scheme around balancing paid work and family. And the good news is now that we have a national scheme. Number 2 was ensuring that women had economic security across the life cycle. And most of the work we've done there is around unpaid caring work. Because the fact is that many women will live in poverty in later life, not because they've been sitting around doing nothing, but because the vast bulk of the work that they've done throughout their life is unpaid. So we started reframing that issue to ask, is poverty to be the reward for a lifetime spent caring? The third area I've focused on is promoting women in leadership. Fourthly, very much around preventing violence against women, and that includes sexual harassment, particularly in the workplace. And then finally, ensuring that we have the strongest gender equality laws in this country and that we have some strong agencies that are able to administer those laws. But the work that I do actually comes from the International Convention. And you can see on the screen in front of you a convention which is called the UN's Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, or what we refer to as the CEDAW Convention. The CEDAW Convention is the main international convention which speaks to the rights of women. And it was adopted by the UN General Assembly in the late 1970s, 1979, and it entered into force in 1981. So the good news is that Australia signed on to be a party to this convention, but the sad news is that at the time that this convention was drafted in late 70s, violence against women hadn't yet entered the international discourse, so it wasn't explicitly included in the CEDAW Convention. So there's no doubt violence against women was happening, it just wasn't part of the international discourse. And it wasn't until about 20 years later in 1992 that the CEDAW Committee, so that's the main treaty body that administers the International Convention, that they rectified this omission when they adopted what they called their General Recommendation 19 on violence against women. And that Recommendation 19 confirmed that gender-based violence is a form of discrimination against women, is a violation of women's human rights, and is something that the CEDAW Convention should encapsulate. So when we look at how the CEDAW Committee defines gender-based violence, they do it in very broad terms. They talk about violence that's directed against women, against a woman because she is a woman, or that affects women disproportionately, and also addresses violence against women that occurs within that family context, within the community, and which is perpetrated by the state. The CEDAW Committee also recognised that traditional attitudes by which women are regarded as subordinate to men or as having stereotypical roles can also contribute to the perpetuation of violence against women. And we know in every country around the world there are social norms about the place of women in society in that particular nation. But shortly after this General Recommendation 19 was adopted, what happened in 1993, so a few years later, there was a declaration on the elimination of violence against women. And what we've got on that slide just in front of you is a quote from the Declaration that captures the clear recognition of violence against women as being a violation of women's human rights. And as Hillary Clinton famously said at the Beijing Platform for Action, she basically said, human rights are women's rights once and for all. So there's a strong connection there. So internationally now, violence against women is being recognised as a serious human rights issue. And it's recognised that the ability of both men and women to live free from violence, to live free from discrimination and harassment is a basic human right for all people and for all women. And when I look around the globe, the sad reality is that in 2014, I think the level of violence against women has never been higher. In fact, I sit on, as Michelle said in her introduction, I have the privilege of sitting on the World Bank's Gender Board. And when I was in Washington just a few months ago at the board meeting, we had a presentation by the World Health Organization. And what I learnt from that was that in 2013, it was reported that for the first time ever, the number of women and girls living with violence was higher than the number of malnourished people in the world. That's the scale of the epidemic that we're dealing with. So the reality also is that violence against women continues to be prevalent right here in Australia. And as I travel around the country, and I travel the length and breadth of Australia regularly, I often ask people, I say to them, look, where do you think violence against women's a problem? And they'll tell me Papua New Guinea, Afghanistan, Pakistan. And yeah, they're absolutely right. But the fact is, this is a significant issue right here in our own backyard, here in Australia. The other thing I like to do is say to people, you know, if you put a map of the world in front of me and I closed my eyes and just pointed to any country, I can tell you instantly one thing about that country, and that is that I know that violence against women will be a problem. So what's happened in Australia, as you can see on the next slide, is that over the last 15 years or so, we have taken some really significant steps towards addressing violence against women. We saw for the first time every state and territory come together with the federal government to develop what's called the National Plan to Reduce Violence Against Women and Their Children. And it's a plan that started in 2010 and takes us up to 2022. So it's really a 12-year plan, which is made up of 4 3-year smaller plans. And it's the good news about not just having a national plan, but having it endorsed by Commonwealth and all states and territories is important, because whilst the Commonwealth might be important in terms of setting the policy and a lot of the national frameworks, the actual service delivery and a lot of the funding for those services needs to come at the state and territory level. So this national plan addresses both domestic violence and sexual assault, which are 2 major forms of violence against women in Australia. And really, in a sense, the plan is Australia's attempt to uphold the human rights of all Australian women through the CEDAW Convention. So that's about bringing the CEDAW Convention, the Declaration, and the Beijing Platform for Action down into domestic law through our Sex Discrimination Act, but also through these national plans to reduce violence against women and their children. Importantly, the national plan recognises that the unequal distribution of power and resources between men and women, or what we call the gender inequality, plus an adherence to really rigid and narrow gender stereotypes, gender roles, reflects the gendered patterns in prevalence and perpetration of violence. Because violence against women is, in the main, significantly perpetrated by men. There is some, of course, violence against men. There is violence against men, and I've just yesterday spent the day at the ABS to look at both violence against women and violence against men. But the form that violence takes is often quite different. just to come back here to the national plan that you can see on the screen, that there's been a number of institutions which have been funded under the national plan. One of them was called the National Centre for Excellence. You may have heard about it in that guise. It's just been renamed ANROS, the Australian National Research Organisation for Women's Safety. It's on the second bullet point there. And they've just released their National Research Agenda, which aims to guide the academic and practice-based research in this area. Because what was happening is we were finding there was great academic research happening all around Australia, but there was no research agenda, national research agenda. So ANROS has now come on board and just in the last month, I think, released their national research agenda. So that might be something for those, particularly if you're working in this area, that you're interested in looking at. The other third bullet point there, the National Foundation to Prevent Violence Against Women and Their Children, that was set up about a year ago now. You may know that Natasha Despoja's heading it up. And the foundation is really about educating the Australian population about the issues of violence against women and children. And it's also focusing predominantly on private prevention, so stopping the violence before it starts. And actually, the foundation is doing quite a lot of work, particularly up in the Northern Territory at the minute. So just coming back to the situation here in Australia, there's a huge prevalence of violence against women in Australia. What we do know is that 1 in 3 women have experienced physical violence, 1 in 4 have experienced workplace sexual harassment, and 1 in 5 have experienced sexual violence. We know on average that somewhere around 60 to 70 Australian women are killed by their partners each year, so more than 1 a week is murdered by an intimate partner, often after a history of domestic violence. And what we know is that there are certain groups, like Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, women with disabilities, that are at heightened risk of violence. So that paints a pretty bleak picture. The thing that I'd like to say there is, having sat with the ABS yesterday and really looked at their personal safety data, which comes out of 2012, is that what we're seeing is that between 2005 and 2012, the levels of violence against women have remained at pretty much a constant level, slightly uptrend. The violence against men is starting to decrease, and they're looking at trying to understand what that picture's about. But there are the two issues. One is gender inequality more generally, and then violence against women. They are increasingly entering public discourse. You're reading a lot about them in the media, and there's a lot of speeches and whatever. So the advocacy is being lifted, and I think that's a good thing, because gender inequality is very related to violence against women. And in fact, as I say on this one, the biggest risk factor for becoming a victim of sexual assault, domestic or family violence is being a woman. And you can see Natasha said that in one of her speeches for the foundation. But violence against women is a direct result of gender inequality. It's about unequal power between women and men, and a society which really perpetrates or adheres to specific gender roles and stereotypes. If you just take a look at this graph on the next screen, I'll just see if I can get it to come up here. Let me see if that'll take it along. There we are. Is you can see that those countries which have low gender equality scores, and this is looking at 56 countries across the world, they have much higher levels of violence than those countries with high gender equality scores. And I think that just reinforces the link between gender inequality and violence against women. So the evidence shows us that the more a society works to address gender inequities in public and private life, the less violence women will experience. So therefore, focusing on preventing violence against women by promoting gender equality has a really positive impact. So I suppose in the work that I'm doing in my portfolio, I'm trying to do two things. I'm trying to really put in place some effective strategies to reach higher levels of gender equality, and that's about women's leadership, that's about women in power, that's about ensuring that women participate in paid work, those empowerment strategies, and in a sense also link them to the issues around violence against women. Just have a look on this next slide here. What you can see is we launched, and I'm speaking here about a particular form of violence against women, which is sexual harassment, and particularly we're looking at sexual harassment in the workplace. I launched a campaign together with the union movement, so the ACTU and ACCI, just last week, which was a campaign called Know Where the Line Is. And we called it that because the research has shown us that in many workplaces and across the Australian population, most people don't understand what sexual harassment looks like in paid work. And you can refer them to the legal definition or whatever. What you need to do is make this real for them. And not only that, the research shows that when you call bystanders to action, then the behaviour is shut down much more quickly. And what I wanted to do was to help, firstly, people understand where the line is. So just looking at this on your screen, look, it's fine to say, how was your weekend? But if you then follow that up with, well, did you get any? You've started to cross that line. Or, hey, that dress was made for you. That's fine. But when you go on and say, and your 36 double Ds, that's when you're crossing the line. And what we're trying to do through the campaign is to encourage bystanders to look around them, see what's happening, to talk to people about these issues, and particularly the targets of sexual harassment, and then to actually support people or to take action. So we're reminding people not to underestimate the power of support, because it really can help a colleague stand up and do something about it. And I have to say, this campaign showed me just everyone has their story. The other side of sexual harassment in Australia is that men's sexual harassment of men now represents 23% of all sexual harassment in Australia. So it is a big part of the picture, and it's a growing part of the picture as well. Just on the next slide here, the other thing that we've been working hard is to help business understand that domestic and family violence is a workplace issue. There's a spillover between what happens at home and what happens in the workplace, because up until the last couple of years, if I went into a workplace, even big employers, and I started talking about domestic violence, I'd be told very politely, look, stop right there. That's private business between him and her. We're here, we are a workplace. But what I'm really, the message I'm taking into business, into organisations, is that that what affects employees affects employers. And there's no doubt that the prevalence data would tell us that in all our organisations, we have both people who are living with domestic violence, maybe the victims of domestic violence or survivors of domestic violence, and then on the other hand, of course, we have perpetrators of violence. And when I look at the data, we know that 800,000 women across different industries, different employers, small, medium and large enterprises are in paid work and also living in an intimate relationship characterised by violence. Because if you look at the fact that about 1.2 million women today are in a relationship, are either currently or have recently been in a relationship which has been an intimate relationship characterised by physical violence, then 800,000 of those women are in paid work, at least at the beginning. So there's no question that business and organisations have a role in removing this blight from Australian society. And I've been getting around and talking about this a lot, particularly last year I did the Fairfax oration all around Australia on this topic. And I had a call from a woman I'd known for many years who'd come to one of my speeches. She's a senior manager in a bank. And she said that following my speech, the next day she called all her staff together and she said, I want to do something different at our staff meeting today. I want to talk about domestic and family violence. I want to talk to you about the prevalence data and what it means for business. And she said, look, I started that meeting by saying, I'm going to recount my own story. It's a story that I've never told before. It's a story about growing up in a violent household, wiping the blood off my mother's face, taking her to hospital, the shame, the silence, the terror of growing up in that environment. And she said to all the staff, she said, now I want you to do one thing. I want you to go away and tell every person in the bank my story, because by you doing that, I hope I make it easy for others to tell theirs. So I think just a simple and courageous step like Margot took in that environment can make the difference to an employee anxious about explaining their absence or seeking safer options at work, to change their telephone number, to access a flexible work arrangement, or even to seek help in leaving a relationship. So there is a lot of work that can be done by business. We know that Canada is leading a lot of good initiatives in this area, and as you can see on the screen, domestic violence has a significant cost to Australian business. It's calculated about $500 million annually or a bit more, and there are things that workplaces can do, particularly even small things such as giving personal safety information at the same time that you're giving workplace health and safety information. And if people are interested in that, we've got a lot of information on that. The other thing I'd say is that I've seen some organisations, and Four Corners did an episode on this a couple of years ago, about the intervention that workplaces can have with perpetrators as well. Four Corners followed a number of men who undertook a voluntary program to address their violent behaviour. And what had actually triggered their inclusion in this a behavioural change program was not the fact that they were beating up their wives at home, which they absolutely were, but that their aggression was spilling over into the workplace. And their manager had called them in and said, look, you know, if you continue to speak to your co-workers in that way, then you have no future in this organisation. And the impact of that was that they engaged in positive behavioural change, which had a really beneficial flow on at home. So I suppose my point in telling you that story is that organisations, workplaces, business absolutely can have an impact on decreasing the amount of violence against women and children in our nation. Just finally, on the slide 4, there's no question that particular groups do have, and more vulnerable groups have higher prevalence rates. And I'm just here bringing up a screen about women with disability. I had the great privilege of being involved in a project which was a Stop the Violence, Stop the Silence project with women with disabilities, where we looked at the different nature of violence against women as well in institutional settings, in group housing perpetrated by carers, and what the implication of that violence would be. And that's an issue that is now being picked up more and more in the national plan, and we hope to see a greater level of focus on the particular issues for women with disability and stopping violence against them. I just want to finish now by saying that I do hope in closing that today I've been able to convey just how important it is to understand and respond to violence against women as a human rights issue. Yes, it's morally wrong. It's abhorrent, but equally important. It's a denial of our basic human right, our right to live free from violence. And I think when you put it in that context and you understand the relationship between gender equality more generally and preventing violence against women, then we make the argument for change stronger. And of course, we must never forget that at the heart of the human rights-based approach lies the woman or girl who is experiencing violence. And our every effort must be aimed at promoting and protecting her rights to live a life free from violence, to promote and protect her rights to actually have a remedy should those rights be violated. So I want to leave you today with just thanking you for your time and really participating with me in this conversation. And also I want to thank you for all the fabulous work that's done in this country to prevent family and domestic violence. I mean, I have a great pleasure of traveling to refuges, to domestic violence education centres, to drop-in centres, to some of the most innovative and courageous NGOs in this country. And I just want to thank you for doing the most difficult work that there is to do in Australia. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Liz, for that insightful presentation. It's been really informative to hear what's happening internationally and also in Australia. Now, we are going to open up for a few questions for Liz to answer. So if you would like to ask a question, please do so by typing your questions into the chat box down the bottom left-hand side of your screen. Now, we have had a couple of questions come through while the presentation was running. Our first question comes from Megan. So, Liz, where can I find more information about my role in the workplace responding to DFV if one of my employees disclosed? Are there any practical steps I can take?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think absolutely, Megan, it starts with each of us being concerned individuals and then arming ourselves with information about what strategies will be effective and what will not be. The Domestic Violence Clearinghouse has had quite a good set of information about what workplaces could do to prevent domestic violence, or to support really survivors of domestic violence, and also to educate their staff about it. Now, the Domestic Violence Clearinghouse has been rolled up into the new ANROS. So I think the foundation that Natasha Stott-Despoja leads, ANROS, and also just going out onto the web, because we found a lot of really fabulous resources coming out of Ottawa, of all places. So they had some guides for employers about what they could do, how to have conversations, just simple strategies and resources. So I think those two Australian organisations plus one internationally would give you a good starting point.
That's great. We've got another question here from Cass. Does the Commission have a strategy around how to manage domestic violence themes across social media?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's a great question as well, because social media, whilst as you know, there's so much positive about social media in terms of women's empowerment as well, because women are a large proportion of those that contribute to social media. But there's also the very negative side of social media, in that there's it in a sense is a new medium to perpetrate violence against women, and also in sexual harassment. You used to at least be free from workplace-based sexual harassment when you went back home. That's no longer the case, because it can follow you through the social mediums, through email and everything else back into the house. We have done some general work around cyberbullying, and we had a summit where we brought together ISPs and providers to talk about what types of regulation would be effective, and there's information about that on our website. But I have to say, in terms of having a single strategy, no, at the minute, you know, we haven't done a whole lot of work around that. Having said that, our sexual harassment campaign is very much a social media campaign, and all the tools that we're using are available from our website as well.
That's great. Thanks, Liz. Now, we are getting some great questions coming through to the chat box. Just a reminder to everybody, we do still have 10 minutes left, so please type in all of your questions in the chat box down the bottom left-hand side of your screen. Our next question comes from Danica. In speaking with people around the country, what have you found to be the most effective way to get across to people of the link between gender inequality and violence against women?
Well, it's interesting. I tell a story. Usually what I find is you've got to engage people's heads and their hearts. So when I talk about the link between gender inequality and violence, I usually tell a story. And it's a story of a woman that I met in a refuge. This was probably about 6 months ago now. And she'd come in the night before with her children. You know, it was a crisis situation. She'd fled to the refuge. And I met her the next day. And we started to talk, and then she said to me, she said, look, Liz, how are we going on the campaign to get more women onto boards? Well, seriously, you could have knocked me over with a feather. I mean, why would she care about getting women onto boards? But I started to understand, and she helped me understand, that actually getting women onto boards, getting women in senior leadership level in our country in powerful positions, that's about women's proximity to economic power. And while women don't have proximity to economic power, they will be marginalised all across Australia. And that there's a strong link between those initiatives we're doing to close the gap on gender equality and the way women are treated much more generally in every aspect of Australian society, including in their own families and homes, which speaks to the issues of violence against women.
Thanks, Liz. We've got another question here from Natalie. The recent Yes All Women Twitter campaign has gone viral, and there are some men who are getting on it and supporting it, but there are others who are slamming it. What do you think the role of men is in gender equality campaigns?
So I just think engaging men is just so important. Yes, men are part of the problem, but men are so much part of the solution as well. And I just want to give an example of that. And I love the Yes All Women campaign. I mean, fantastic, I say. But in relation to men, one of the things that I started to understand as Australia's Sex Discrimination Commissioner, it probably took me about kind of a year and a half, 2 years to get this, was that actually it wasn't just about women's activism, although that was absolutely critical because that's what has got us to where we are today, but that the future needed to be about powerful men taking the message of gender equality to other men. That was what was going to create change, because to expect women to create the levels of change when they don't necessarily hold the levers of power was really an illogical approach. So that's when I started to put together the Male Champions of Change strategy, and now we have around 25 of Australia's most powerful men. So they're men that are running the iconic companies like Telstra, like Woolworths, like CBA, ANZ, Qantas, whatever, men who are the most senior leaders of the military, senior leaders of our government, like the head of a Treasury, head of Prime Minister and Cabinet, coming together to use their power and influence to increase the number of women at leadership level across our country. And they do things like they refuse to speak at any events where there's not a good gender balance on the speaking panel. So they're pulling out of events here or there. They're working within their own organisation. Telstra is one example of this, where every role in the organisation is now available in a flexible work arrangement. So they're trying to change the starting point of work. They're looking down their supply chain and saying, you know what, we want to interact and buy services and products from suppliers who get gender equality in the way that we're starting to get it. So we're going to start to move our supply dollars. I mean, there's a whole range of initiatives that they're embarked on, but more importantly, they've really lifted their advocacy. So when there was a suggestion that there would be strong changes to the Gender Equality Authority in terms of what information Australia will collect about women's representation, it was the men that came out, as well as a lot of great women. But those powerful men also came out and said, no, gender equality reporting is not red tape. It's absolutely critical to us making progress on gender equality here in Australia. So in summary, I think engaging with men, wherever they are, whether young men, older men, powerful men, not, so it doesn't really matter. Engaging men is absolutely part of the solution.
Absolutely. Thanks, Liz. Our next question is here. If I see harassment in my workplace or anywhere else, what can I do?
Yeah, and it's a great question, because that's the first part of our sexual harassment strategy. It's kind of see, talk, support. See is about looking around and actually seeing what's happening around you. And I think if you do see it, then the thing that we're suggesting, and it's important to be safe yourself. So if intervening in the moment is going to lead to victimization against you, then that may not be the most effective strategy. Because what we know is that when people start talking about it, and then they start offering support to those who are experiencing it and raising it more generally in the context of the organisation and with their managers and friends and family, that's when the behaviour often shuts down, and also the person who is the target may then find the confidence to actually speak out themselves. So I think it's keeping an eye open for it. Sexual harassment and sexual assault doesn't come out of nowhere. It's really on a continuum, and at one end is demeaning attitudes about women. And I think when we hear conversations which are demeaning of women, if it's appropriate, but to really come into the conversation, not in a killjoy way, but to say, look, we don't talk about that stuff around here, or it's really not appropriate to talk like that in this environment, or we're a professional environment here, or whatever it is, whatever the language is that you feel most comfortable with. I think it's important because if you shut it down there at the initial stages, then you're challenging the development of a culture that might lead to more general harassment, particularly sexual harassment or sexual assault.
Great, thanks Liz. Now we've got so many questions coming through here. Just a reminder to everybody after the webinar, if we aren't able to get to any of your questions, please fill out that exit survey and continue on to the discussion tool where you can continue your discussion with Liz after the webinar. Now our next question comes from Miranda. What advice would you have for women wanting to get into leadership roles?
Yeah, and it's a great time for women to get into leadership roles in Australia at the minute. Because, just because there is a focus on this area and there's a recognition that women's leadership actually builds better outcomes, I think it's a good time. So what I would say is I think the most important thing really for women, and depends where you sit, are you sitting at middle management or more junior than that, is to try and find sponsors. And mentors are very important, but mentors talk to you, sponsors talk about you. So sponsors are someone who's sitting at a more senior level who can start to advocate your case when, say, promotional opportunities or opportunities for training and advancement come up. And I'm seeing more and more, particularly both men and women, though, put their hands up to say, look, I'm really happy to sponsor individual women. And in fact, I have to say, a lot of those organisations, and if you just looked at the Male Champions of Change organisations, they're now starting to put in place more formal sponsorship agreements. But not only that, they're penalising those people who don't do it very well, and they're rewarding those people who do. So I think trying to connect with sponsors, learning from other women about what worked for them and what didn't, maybe engaging in some of the women's leadership events that are happening all across the country. And you come onto our website as well, because we've got a lot of resources there which talk about women, particularly in male-dominated industries, and strategy for women progression, not just attraction into male-dominated industries, but progression in male-dominated industries. We've got a whole lot of information on our website.
Great, thanks Liz. We've probably got time just for one last quick question. So the question here comes from Laura. What can be done to make this myth of flexible work hours a reality for more working mothers without talking about the case-specific information?
Yeah, you're absolutely right on that, that we need it to be mainstreamed. At the minute, flexible work is almost like it's a poor relation to mainstream work. And we've done, you will have seen the work that we released just a couple of weeks ago on the prevalence of discrimination, not just when a woman announces she's pregnant or goes on parental leave, but as importantly when she comes back to work and tries to negotiate a flexible work arrangement. Look, I think there's two ways that we can take this forward. At the minute, most employers see flexible work as kind of a mummy track for women with children. And unfortunately, no amount of women with young children embracing flexible work is going to change that positioning. What we need is men working flexibly, because when a man works flexibly, particularly if he's a senior man, it sends a cultural message that not only can he be an engaged dad or son or whatever he's doing it for, but also he can be a serious player in paid work. So firstly, I think that the strategies that are in place in organisations need to be gender neutral. They need to encourage both men and women to work flexibly. But the other thing is that I think Telstra's All Roles Flex initiative, and we'll be profiling it in the next few months, it actually sets a new standard, a new normal. Because what Telstra said, and it was David Sodhi, who's the CEO, who's one of my male champions, he basically said that from 1 March this year, every job in that organisation will be advertised as available in a flexible work arrangement. Now, he did that in a leap of faith. He knew it was likely to get him some of the best female talent around, and that's one of the reasons he did it. But he also thought that we can try and plan this and scheme it, but we're just going to take that leap and change the starting point of work. We're going to say the starting point is now flexibility is the starting point, rather than what we call the ideal worker model, which is really where most jobs start in Australia. So he said we're going to start with flexibility, and then if we need to move back to the ideal worker model, we can. And I just think I saw some early data presented at the meeting just last month, a couple of weeks ago when I brought the Male Champions of Change together, on all the indicators in terms of the attraction rates for women, the retention rates, the productivity, all those things have increased. What's dropped is absenteeism, the client engagement scores, all those things are trending in the right direction. So I think if we need a few really courageous companies to go and do that and then convince others through the evaluation data that they'll have, which will show that flexible workers, I mean, flexibility buys loyalty like no amount of money will ever do, and that we need to just embrace this as a main form of working. Jobs should come in all shapes and sizes. That's what will retain the best talent in Australia.
Wow, thanks, Liz. Now, it does look like we are just about out of time, so thank you so much, Liz, for answering all of those questions. And also thank you to everybody for attending today's webinar. Now, please do stay logged in to take our short online survey. And at the end of the survey, you will be provided with a link to our discussion forum, where you can ask Liz any further questions that we may not have had a chance to get to today. Now, the next webinar is on Thursday, the 26th of June, and will be presented by Kelsey Hegarty, and she'll present on domestic violence, how to talk with patients about their experiences. Now, on behalf of the entire 1-800-RESPECT team, thank you for attending this webinar, and we hope that you found it very valuable. Please stay online now to take our quick survey and join the online discussion. Thank you.